Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to these conversations. These are stories and contributions that really need to be heard. It is my hope that these ideas and contributions actually become part of our discourse as we rebuild after the effects of the pandemic. This week, I'm releasing a special conversation. It's an interview that I had with one of my coworkers who agreed to do this, and it proved to be really insightful. For those of you who are teachers, for my friends who work with junior youth, or for anyone who has thought deeply about how this period has given them a lot of time to reflect, this conversation offers wonderful insights. If you are enjoying these interviews, remember you can subscribe and you can hit the bell to be notified of new episodes every Tuesday. My name is Witt Morgano, and this is Inner Sight. All right, so for those of you watching, this is Elizabeth Hatch, and we are coworkers. We both work at the same middle school. We're both sixth grade teachers. She teaches English, I teach math, and there's more of us in the team. But I just wanted to try this out. I've never interviewed one of my coworkers before, so here we are.
Ooh, first time.
Yes, I know. I'm excited.
Well, I am too. I love these videos.
Thanks. Coolio. All right. Well, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. Maybe you could just introduce like what your life has been like recently, and then we could talk a little bit more about how you got into your career, because I know it's like you're really passionate about it. So, but we'll start just what things are like right now for you.
Yeah. Today is the last day of school.
Yes, it is.
Kind of crazy. It's definitely surreal. We went into the school yesterday, like both of us, just for context. We're handing out stuff from the lockers back to students, and you got to see a couple students' faces. And at one point, I went back over to my room to grab some stuff so I can, lesson plan over the summer. And it's just surreal walking into your room and seeing the stuff that you had up on the board from March. And like the old units that like you were just finishing and thinking about all the stuff that you were going to wrap up the school year with, and it's not there. So mentally, in terms of like where I'm at, this whole last 2 months has just been a mind job. I mean, it's been like that, I think, for every teacher, I don't know if, you've been feeling it, but just the fact, it just feels so unfinished. It's such an unsettling feeling. I mean, I have a contractor friend, and I was trying to describe it to him as like, imagine a contracting job, a giant house that you've worked essentially all year to build. And it's like your year's work all in this one project. And you get to you're in the last like home stretch of building this house. And you just have to walk off the project. You just have to walk away. And he was like, that would be absolutely terrible. And I said, that's essentially the feeling that we all felt. Like we just walked away. And I mean, aside from the professional aspect of it, it's for me as an introvert, especially, going from like, knowing 75 kids. As an ELA teacher, I have like half the amount because we have block periods. So yes. No judgment from the math teacher over there with only
I have about 150. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. You go from knowing these kids really personally, especially as ELA, because you have them for 2 periods. So for us, we have them twice as long, and so we really bond with the students, and we especially have these like really close relationships with certain kids that, just need that extra attention because you just get a sense that they're not getting it from home. And when you walk away from something like that, you can't help but think about them all the time.
Oh,
And
sure.
so like the emotional process of the last 2 months of going from like, oh, okay, well, it was spring break anyway, so this is kind of nice, to, okay, this is real. Like, I'm a little bit scared, to then like real depression.
Mm.
I don't know if you had this, but I had like a serious bout of depression for a while where I just worried about my students, and I like lamented the end of year that I never had. It's the sweet spot for teachers when you get to, make those final connections with kids, and you have all these in jokes, and it's
Hmm.
just like the best time of year. So a very rambling reply to this question is I'm all over the place. Personally,
Yeah.
I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. So getting the extra time with them is a blessing. I haven't had to homeschool them. So I'm in this kind of sweet spot in terms of parenting, where I know a lot of parents are really stressed with that. And a lot of parents, they can't afford daycare and stuff. From my perspective, I'm a teacher, so I get the summers off with them.
Hmm.
Getting almost essentially an extra summer's worth of time with them has been priceless.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So you were saying you feel like, well, you classified yourself as an introvert, and yet you were more relating it to how not getting this like deep like connection with your students is like really hard, as opposed to like, oh, this is great, like I have all this time to
Yeah.
myself. This, I don't know, I thought that was interesting. But
Yeah. I think like initially, I don't, I mean, I'm maybe just completely speaking for myself here, but I think initially I was like, oh my gosh, more free time.
mm,
I have to stay at home. I can't go out. Like,
mm,
that's no problem for me. But I think I've realized how necessary it is to have companionship.
mm,
Um, and I didn't realize that before. I thought as an introvert, I didn't like, or it was like I didn't enjoy being social. I can be social, but it's like not where I get my energy from, when you
mm,
read stuff about people who are extroverts. But what I really realized was that, introverts have this way of like building a home in other people, right? And through their relationship, through like a close, trusting relationship with other people. So when you create that with even small people, with even preteens,
mhm.
and then that's ripped away from you, the loss of companionship, I think, has been a real struggle in terms of like, I don't know, self-realization at this point. Yeah, kind of a
Yeah.
weird thing to realize about myself, that like I actually really enjoy the relationships that I have, and I really need to like show that more. That's what this has taught me, I think.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I know you were asking like if I feel that, and I would say I'm more of an introvert too. I mean, if I could describe myself as a little kid, well, when I was in school, I was a kid that I had friends, but I would also often spend recesses like walking the fence line,
Oh
just
yeah.
reflecting. And
Hmm.
so, but I also, I'm a beginning teacher, so I haven't quite like found that stride as far as, like make uh feeling that sense of like, oh, I'm really building this house and like these really great units yet. But I will say that the social aspect is just, I definitely had a few weeks, especially when the actual stay-at-home order was going on, and especially since
Hmm.
I live alone, where that was really, really hard. And so I'm
Hmm.
just trying to obviously, find new ways to get that social interaction. Part of it is like the interviews, and then some other things that I do. But yeah, it's definitely been hard. uh, I do want to ask a little more about. Um, one thing I noticed about you is you're obviously like super passionate about this. It's not just a job for you. Like I don't know. Like one thing that struck me was like as soon as the things changed for our school, we were even on break, and you were like one of the first people that was like, okay, let's think about like how we can like help these students. And so, but I want to know a little more of a background as far as like why are you so passionate about it? Even if does it go as far back as when you were in middle school?
Yeah. So like origin story here.
Origin story,
Yes,
yes.
the origin story at Mrs. Hatch. Yeah, I totally became a teacher because of middle school. sixth grade even, which is really coincidental. But when I was in sixth grade, I was like in a weird place. I mean, if you think about introverted preteen, I mean, like you explained, it's like a whole lot of like, you're quiet and people don't know why you're quiet and you don't have a lot of close friends. And so in elementary, you know, when you have friends, you're like friends of proximity. So you have like friends that your parents set you up with. And when you're little like that, except at least like, I guess my generation of being little, like we didn't have smartphones back then. So like you got along just because you both liked birds in class. And so it was easy to have friends then. And in middle school, this girl moves in next door and she, you know, she doesn't have any friends. And I am like a super empathetic person for like, especially anybody who seems to be like suffering or alone. Probably is, I mean, like it comes from like reading. It's a heroism thing, right? When you read, like the hero trait is always like feeling for that person and you want to be a hero for people, right? So here's me, this like young, literate kid who wanted to, you know, save her and help her out and be that person. And so I invite her into my friend group and they're all not for it. Like they don't like her. She's poor compared to us. Being middle class. And so they're immediately like, I don't know, she's weird, whatever. And I thought that was really shallow and unfair, obviously. So my sense of like justice and righteousness is immediately like piqued. And I'm like, how dare you? I will be her friend. And so I become her best friend and we get really close. I tell her all these secrets, right? Because she becomes my first and like best friend, like what everyone had always talked about as a best friend, which at that point was like defined as like this one person you pour all of your like your, you know, secrets and all the things into. And so I do this is my first best friend like that, and she totally turns her back on me in sixth grade. So over the course of fifth grade, we become super close, and then we get into sixth grade, and things change, as you know. Like,
yes.
I don't know, you know what the kids do. Like, they start the year as kids, as like elementary students, and then they start to see all of these other students from other elementary schools, and they're all kind of comparing themselves to each other. And then the older kids are there, and the older kids are starting to become teens. And they start to, you know, get interested in like who's wearing what and what do you look like, and girls start to wear makeup for the first time. And so sixth grade is really like this experimental year of kids getting to like, you know, growing up. And she decided she was going to grow up and she wanted to look a certain way. And so one day she writes me a letter, and it's basically like, I don't want to be your friend anymore because you're not cool enough for me, and you don't cut your hair like this, and you don't wear things like this.
Whoa.
Oh yeah. Like, and honestly, in retrospect, I went to a school that I'm not going to name it, but it's kind of has a stigma for being a bunch of rich kids because it's out in a certain area where there's a lot of big houses. So there can be a lot of that out there. So she got caught up with that. She got caught up in the materialism and stuff. And, you know, here's me, like, I have 3 brothers. I'm a total tomboy. I literally don't care what I'm wearing to school and what's makeup because I don't know that. So it broke my heart, obviously.
The materialism? Like, she was like, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, so she was thinking you weren't good enough for her.
Yeah, because I didn't wear good enough stuff. Like, she essentially, like, you know, it was like I don't know. That's where she wanted to head, and she didn't know how to say that to me, and who the hell would, you know? But her 12-year-old mind decided the letter would do it. And then after that, she decided to start bullying me, like pretty bad. So, you know, it was like I would walk down the hall and she would yell my secrets to Everyone in the hall.
Secrets that you have told each other over the past year?
Yeah.
Oh my.
And it was stuff that's like, I mean, you'd be like, oh no, she's doing secrets. But like, for example, I had like bladder issues as a kid. And so every now and then, like, I, would have accidents. And so that was like a really close thing that I would have to kind of confess to my best friends because I didn't want to get suddenly in a situation where it happened and they had no idea what it was and they made fun of me. So I would just always kind of I would just be like, hey, sometimes this happens. And, I eventually got over it, but she would scream like, the diaper girl, oh, it's a bedwetter. Like she would, I mean, it was like, as a teacher, it's the kind of stuff that like you'd see in a TV show for like classic bullying, and so it was awful. And then one day we were coming out of a gym, like an assembly, and the girl especially that she became really good friends with, her name was Cassie. She flipped out and she was like behind me and she started to like loudly. And this is, I mean, imagine a packed hall coming out of an assembly, just kids everywhere, like more condensed than anywhere else in the whole school ever. And she just starts all this stuff again. And I was done. So I turned around and like in my preteen head, I was like, I don't even know what I'm going to do, but I can't do it anymore. And I shoved her. I tried to shove her as hard as I could. And I basically was like, stop it! Like, stop! Like, just stop! And like shoved her. And my English teacher saw it. And her reaction was not, you two are coming with me and I saw a fight and you're getting suspended. She pulled me back to her room and she asked me what was going on. And I just, loaded and told her what was going on. And then she pulled her into the room separately. And then nothing happened after that. Not a single thing. That girl didn't look at me in the hall. She never said a single thing to me again. I never even heard a whisper of rumor happening. And that power, like the fact that one woman, I'm going to get emotional here because that was like huge. The fact that one woman could like influence my life.
That's big.
It was huge. Yeah. So that was the first moment that I realized that like teachers had an enormous power that was beyond just educational. And then, in high school, I had these great moments of self-discovery, essentially, where like my high school teachers believed in my writing and they encouraged the voice in me that I was trying to get out. And let me take a deep breath because I'm like still emotional from this anecdote. So I get into 9th and 10th grade. I had the same English teacher. He was an amazing man. This old hippie. He'd have us do creative writing all the time, and like you could share your creative writing after you wrote it, and like it was just this showcase moment of where you could feel really proud about what you had done. So he really brought out the creative side of me in terms of writing. It was always my favorite class. And then as a junior, my teacher, Mrs. Nichols, we started reading Walden by Thoreau. And that book, it was like a perfectly timed book. Just some of the quotes in there were like exactly what I was starting to think about like living deliberately, like trying to like create the life that you want and see everything around you, be in touch with nature was huge, right? Because I'm a very like I like very into nature, very into gardening and being present, all those things. And I told her, I had this conversation with her after class one day that was like, I've never really felt like this about a book before. This really opened like my mind up to thinking these things. And she was so like enthusiastic about it, and she gave me a copy of one of the books. She was like, this used to be mine. I want you to have it. And it was like this beautiful inscription. I still have it. It's on the bookshelf, like in the other room. But it's this beautiful inscription, you know, encouraging me to keep thinking in that way and to keep my, you know, mind open to being in touch with the things around me. And that was amazing. And, you know, and finally as a senior, it was like realizing the power of a well-written essay and how much impact that can have. I wrote like a really powerful story about Nazi Germany, and like did this whole class experiment. And so becoming an English teacher was this process, this mental process of, you know, sitting down and, you know, in college, realizing like what it is exactly that you want to do with your life is not as easy as like people always tell you it's going to be, I think.
Yes.
Like it's really, I often wished that there was some kind of flow chart that where you could just be like, do you like this? Well, then yes, then these are the careers that might be good for you. Or do you like these things? And yes, and I know that there's stuff out there, but like,
Yeah, there's,
you know, because you can do like career quizzes, and you can go to the people that can help you do that stuff, but it didn't feel like genuine to me.
Yes.
It always felt like there were just 10,000 more jobs out there that no one was ever like telling me about, in terms of like, well, there's like, you know, Joe over here who has this job and he got there because, you know, he tried this, and this, and then eventually found that as like his favorite thing. And that was just mind boggling to me. So I go to college for like natural resources. It was up at U of I.
Okay.
Because I was like, I love animals and I love nature and I am passionate about caring for them. And they were like, all right, natural resources, you're going to like hike through the forest and track wolves and stuff and like take care of land management. And it was like, wait, what?
No?
This isn't quite me, because it was a whole lot of like being solitary. It was like out being solitary in the wilderness. And I also kind of realized that, you know, there was like bunch of other kids in there that knew way more about it than me, and it was not my calling. You know, it just wasn't my calling. So
okay.
I sat there and I started to reflect, and I'm like, you know, what does matter to me? And that was, I mean, that reflection, that moment of reflection of me taking that time to think about what is it that made me who I feel like I am today? What is it that like I've always cared deeply about, and then how I then take what I feel like I'm skillful at and impart that on the world around me. Like, that's what I feel like a career should be. And my dad just goes, well, what about teaching English? I mean, you always loved your English teachers. And I'm like, I mean, teaching, because he had always kind of joked, like, you should be a teacher one day, because I have a lot of teachers there's a lot of teachers in my family, and I come from a family of amazing teachers. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I lucked out. I mean, honestly, if you think about that kind of story, just being like, well, I guess I'll change majors. And I fell in love with it, like absolutely fell in love with it. Never thought I'd teach middle school. I always thought I was headed for high school. Got into middle school, fell into our school just because someone was, I think my mom was like, you better apply to all the districts. And yeah, it's a long journey, but I mean, especially if you think about going all the way back to like the beginning, which is getting bullied in 6th grade myself. Yes. But what I tell my students every year at the beginning of the year to kind of cap this off, because I feel like I ramble a lot.
No, this is great stuff. And I have some
at the beginning of the year, I tell my students, like, this is what happened to me. And I will never, ever let that happen to you. Not only will this behavior, any kind of behavior like that, never, and I will get like super, and you know that I can be a super intense person. Like, I have like a really intense like look sometimes, and I will just get up in their faces and be like, I will never, ever allow any kind of treatment like that to happen in this room whatsoever. And you have to know too, that like, I'm an intense person. So if I see you doing it openly, where other people can see you doing this openly, being mean or being cruel, I will confront you about it. openly because you're inviting it. Like, and so there's been times where I will just stop what I'm doing and look over at a kid and be like, you know, do that classic, you know, like, what are you laughing at thing. But a huge part of my classroom management comes from the fact that I don't want any kid to ever feel inferior. And I especially have like a soft place in my heart for the introverted kids. So the other part of me is like, you know, if you don't feel like you can participate because you don't want to raise your hand, you're totally cool. Like, you don't need to. And then I work kind of all year at trying to get those more quiet students to get out of their shell. And so I mean, there's a whole other answer here that I could get into. It's much longer about what I like, my goal for students as a teacher that
well, actually, yeah, I think it's really cool that you talk about how passionate you are for helping people see like what they're interested in and what they really feel like they could do. And I just think that's cool that you're a 6th grade teacher. And here's why. Honestly, I feel like maybe not consciously, but like subconsciously, just in like social structures and things like that, oftentimes people think about this age group, like middle school, or sometimes even high school, is just like, this is just time to have fun and just be entertained. And I think it is like the most opportune time for kids to be thinking really seriously about their path in life and like who they want to be, like not just their career, but you know, all those other things just about the person who they are. So I don't know, it just sounds like perfect that you're in this position. So I thought maybe we could go to like what are some ways that you do that? Like in your classroom, like is there a particular book that you have like an example of that you can share, like, oh, this really has helped my students reflect on this aspect of their life, or a particular assignment or something like that that you feel like helps them in this way?
Yeah, sure. First, I just want to say that, like, I agree with you in a sense. I don't agree necessarily that kids should be thinking about like their careers or like the traditional, you know, like, where am I going to go to college? Where am I, you know, and how many kids do I want? Like, in terms of planning that far ahead. But I do agree with you in the fact that like kids they miss such a huge opportunity in the formative years right now, like for understanding who they are, like thinking about their own thinking, I think is critical. So what you're talking about, like what kind of stuff that I have them do. I mean, we read a lot. I try to have them read as realistically to the type of writing that we're doing as I can. So like for me, my strengths as an ELA teacher, because of my past and because of self-discovery, they lie in like eliciting a response out of students in their writing that helps them to understand who they are. So, you know, we do lots of little tiny writing tasks in class, but every quarter there's a big one. So, and I try to focus it on, you know, how can I like create kind of an essential question that then turns into like an end of the quarter, you know, it could be a personal, so like in the first quarter, there's a narrative, right? Like we have to teach it. Personal narrative writing is essentially like when we were in school, unfortunately, personal narrative writing was interpreted out most often as the, what did you do over the summer writing? Or like, tell me about a time when you saw something fun or whatever. Like it was very much so like, here's your prompt and I hope you have a memory for it. And like, I always start the process as a teacher from a standpoint of, if I was a kid, would I have had anything to say? Would this be hard for, even in this moment right now, if you asked me a question that was like, what was your scariest moment as a child? Like I would have to sit here because I want to answer you correctly. So I'd have to sit here and be like, right. And hope I can, or like, you know, well, hopefully I don't have an immediate answer. But when you ask really specific questions like that, you're putting kids on the spot, right? So we spend a huge amount of time trying to find something that is an actual story. So we will delve into the essential question of like, what makes a story great? And we talk about how, characters make a story great. Their development, their dynamic change, the fact that most protagonists start as like these flawed people in some kind of way, and then they go through a conflict, and then by the end, they've usually risen above it in some kind of way. There's a turning point. They've achieved or done something with the conflict, and even if they achieve it, we start to talk about, like, as sixth graders, because they're just old enough to start to understand more complex stories. So we talk about, like, well, what about those stories where, like, the protagonist fails? Is that really a failure of a story? Like, it's not a good story if somebody, they start off as flawed and at the end they're still flawed. Did they really learn nothing? I mean, and we talk about internal struggle and internal conflict, and how sometimes, even though the external struggle or the bad guy may still be there at the end, the internal process of, like, growing and learning new things and becoming a better person, that was what the story was about. And so we read these stories, but then at the end of the quarter, I have them go through a really extensive process of brainstorming for that dynamic moment in their childhood. And, like, we get through, and it's like, and I will have them go through, and it's like, so you take, like, this many prompts and you just turn them into questions. So it's just like, I want you to just bullet list any kind of accidents you've ever been in, bullet list any kind of storms you've ever been in, bullet list any time you've ever felt betrayed by a person, times. And so we'll go through, and we usually focus on tropes in stories, or archetypes of conflict archetypes. So, like, man versus nature. Have you ever been in an experience with an animal? Have you ever been in an experience with nature of some kind? Have you ever been lost outdoors? Have you ever been hunting and been scared? Have you ever been hunting and had, like, a very, like, visceral experience while hunting? We'll do a huge one, probably the biggest one that kids will focus on and have some absolutely amazing stories, is death is a part of life, and loss of innocence. So those two especially is when I stop and I say to the class, I'm going to get really serious here in a second, and I'm going to tell you some things that, like, some of you've never been through. And then I give them examples of what other students have written for me. And I'm talking about, I've had students write about their father burning their shoes so that they can't run away, hiding in the closet with their sister so that they can't hear their parents fighting.
Oh my.
The barn burning down with the horses inside. One girl found her mom's boyfriend after he had killed himself in the garage.
No.
Another girl wrote about calling the cops on her mom as an 8-year-old while she was drunk driving down the interstate. So essentially what I tell the students is, some of you don't have any darkness in your childhood, and you are so blessed because you don't have that. And so what you're going to give me is probably a really happy story. It could be about, a football game that you didn't think you were going to win and you did, and how you did it and how great it felt. Or it could be about this amazing vacation that you had with your aunt, and how, like, afterwards you realized how much you really love her. And then I say, but some of you have a darkness in you, and you don't realize that writing is an incredibly healing process. And I gave them the example of, like, and I can't remember what prison this is, but they've tried this out in a couple of different prison systems of, they take, like, a set of convicts, and they have them go through an incredibly rigorous, like, consistent writing schedule of where they're journaling constantly. Like, they're constantly writing about what they've done, what they did, how they felt about what they did, how they feel about it now, all these different prompts. And they found that, like, unanimously, the people that were in those groups are significantly changed after the process.
Wow.
More so than going through, like, counseling or just hoping that they've changed how they feel by just being in a prison cell. They, like, legitimately feel, like, real empathy for what they've done by the end of this writing process. And so I tell them, like, just when it's up here or when it's in here, they fester there, right? Like you don't want to look at it because it's dark and it's uncomfortable and it's this demon, this beast in you don't want to see. And I get that. And you don't ever have to write about something that makes you feel uncomfortable. I would never make you do that. But for those of you that are ready to purge it out of you, it's like a cut that's blistered and it needs to be healed and it's infected, and you got to get that thing, you got to open it up, and that's process will be, it'll be opening it up, it's going to bring it back, and it's going to be raw and fresh in your head and in your heart, and then you pour that onto that page so that you can see it, and now it's there. It's not here anymore, it's there. And that whole process of taking that thing from you and being able to see how you think about it, how you truly think and feel about it, and especially like the end of the narrative. So I teach them, like, this narrative is not just you being like, you start the story with like, one day my mom came home and this happened and then I broke my arm. Like, it's not, that's the middle of a story, but like the beginning and the end are the most important part. The beginning is,
oh wow,
who were you before? So if this is the story of you breaking your arm, are you a kid who makes bad decisions? I want to know who you were that led up to this moment. And afterwards, I want to hear about who you are now that this moment happened in your life, because that moment didn't happen to anyone else. That is your moment, and you need to like think about how it's changed you, even if it's only a little bit. And some of these kids, it's just, you get to the end of the narrative, and they're writing about, I mean, it's essentially like they've been through a huge counseling session, but they've done it for themselves. The girl who wrote about, for example, the girl who wrote about her mom on the freeway, calling the cops, she got to the end and she was like, I don't need her anymore in my life, and I don't need to feel guilty about taking matters into my own hands.
Whoa.
And like, I'm going to be like, I'm not going to be this mom. I'm going to be a better mom one day. Like, and it's like all the things, it's the things that you want them to come to, and they've come to it themselves. And it's like this beautiful moment of self-reflection at its finest, honestly, because self-reflection, when it's done right, which can happen when you think of that process of who was I before, what happened to me, and how has it changed me. When you go through that process, as detailed as writing it out in a story form, it's just powerful for these kids. And it's heartbreaking as a teacher, because you have to read some of these and be like, like I've bawled reading, like, obviously, I mean, and then you go and there have been times where literally the next day all I do is just walk up to the kid and give them a big hug and tell them it's all going to be okay, and like I'll always be there for them, because you can't believe some of the stuff that some of these kids have gone through. So that's just first quarter. So first quarter is like, you know, what makes my story worth being heard, like what makes my life, like what from my life is worth being like telling to other people. Because you think about the times in our lives, I would love to teach creative writing. You know that I that's my jam, right? I love creative writing and I'd love to teach it. But in our lives, you know, you think about how many creative stories you'll ever create, and maybe a dozen if you're being silly with your kids or you're making something up with your friends. But the amount of personal narratives that you will tell another person, like just from you to your colleagues when you're just chatting over a beer, or like when you're you know, when you're sharing stories with your kids one day, when you're reminiscing with your family, you tell thousands of personal stories in your life. And every time that you do, you get a chance to give them those three things: who you were leading up to that event, the event itself, and then the purpose of why you decided to tell this person this story. And I think storytelling in that way can really not only help the person telling it, but can like really connect to other people. So That's
Yeah.
just first quarter. I mean, the other quarters, second quarter, we do informative, we learn research, and their EQ, that one is like an evolvement of first quarter. So second quarter, the EQ is how does what I am define who I am? And that's where they start to investigate their own culture. And I've had kids write about being
so cool.
being Latino. No, it's super specific though. So it's like, what are like what are these different parts of your culture? We go through, we brainstorm everything about the different parts of their culture and who they are. And I've had like some of the best ones I've ever had are like how being a Latino girl, being raised to behave like in this way has made me feel like I can only go this far with my life. I've had a kid write about how being raised in a Latino family, but told by their parents never speak Spanish so that they can, be like a part of things more. Like, you're only going to speak English. You're only going to speak English. And then the feeling of disconnect that they have from the rest of their family, because once they are Latino, they're like, I am a Latino, but I have no way of connecting to that Latino side of my culture because the language was taken away from me. And so, and I've had, like other examples could be like, how being raised in a family that doesn't cook has affected me by making me really value like food whenever I go to other people's houses, or being raised as the eldest in my family has caused me to become way more grown up and mature than my siblings because I constantly have to take care of them. And the benefits of that are that I'm responsible, but the negatives are that I lost my childhood. So it's like, it's also a narrative, but it's more of like an expository narrative where they research kind of their own culture, and they talk about how they're informing, right? They're informing of how it's impacted them. And then the last quarter, the last one we just had is, how be heard? Like, how is my voice important? How does what I have to say impact the world around me? And it's where they learn argument. So they learn to what really means something to me and how can I convey that to the world in an unbiased way. And so I teach them all about like rhetoric, what is logic, what is credibility, what is emotion, and how do all three of those things in a rhetorical triangle create a strong argument. But, inside that, like, how do you use emotion without manipulating people? How do you bring in the credibility of an unbiased source, and therefore what is bias and what is like fake news, and how do you have to be vigilant to look very hard to make sure that you're not citing a place that people would doubt. And then logic, which is you cannot just make a bunch of emotional sounding claims that don't have facts to support them. You need to be clear. If you want to be persuasive, you need to be very clear about what you're trying to say. And if it's not clear, you need to slow down and make it very clear so that the people understand what you're saying. Because if you talk in vagary or like you're all over the place, people will poke holes in that. And that last quarter especially is one that I'm really fond of because it's like, oh my God, I'm looking at the world around me and thinking, how can I take all the ugliness I see on social media and try to influence kids to be a smarter, kinder generation than what I see happening.
Yeah. Let's go there. Can we go a little bit? We could close with this. So if, like you said, as you look out at the world, those are some of the things that you see, and it could be something else, but we could stick with that too. Could you share a little bit more? Since so many things have kind of come to a halt with this coronavirus situation, a lot of systems have like just either changed or stopped. Can you maybe just share, what do you think, what are your hopes as far as what this could help us? Sorry, I'm going to have to reword that. How could we move forward as a better, like, collective, like as a whole world?
Sure. I mean, on that note, what I was just saying, I honestly think that a lot of people, well, unfortunately, a lot of people have brought politics into coronavirus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to get past that. That's one thing. I think people need to realize, especially from this was a health crisis with medical professionals trying to tell us what we needed to do to keep other people healthy. And there were giant groups of people on both sides that were just not paying attention to information, you know, like true information, factual information. And I think the first thing I would hope people would do is to realize, like, maybe I bring politics into too much stuff and I need to just take a step back. But
Just
I think
like in general, not just this.
Yeah, just why do I need to apply and like two sides to every single thing that we do? Like we don't have to constantly be at each other on everything. And like when you defend yourself on something, you are kind of somehow in our country, when we start to take a defensive stance of like, you know what, I'm going to wear this mask, or like, you know what, I'm not going to wear a mask. Suddenly, now that we're so much more vocal about our defensive standpoints because we're on social media and everybody feels like they have to like say what they feel all the time, is the second that somebody gets on there and posts something that's even slightly defensive, it like almost welcomes the offensive, right? It's like we live in this culture where like now you've opened up and other people want to respond and, you know, take jabs, and I just feel like people are just taking ugly jabs anytime that they can get. Like that's just, people are getting into this like routine of wanting to do that to each other. And one of the best things I've seen about this whole pandemic has been people of all times really showing empathy. And some of the stuff I've read and watched on it, you know, better people than me have said better things than me in terms of saying things like, you know, it really shows you what humanity is capable of in terms of helping other people. And so I think that empathetic nature of like what we're all capable of, you know, reaching out, doing new things, helping others, like what you're doing, I think that's the stuff that we need to realize. And one of the biggest things that I think I reposted was about how this all feels like a big reset. It's like no other time that I can even think of. I mean, I can think of probably handfuls of times, including wars usually, but these massive worldwide events that essentially cause society to completely like restructure it, to hit pause or to hit reset and say, how do we want to move forward? Like, did my politicians, did my leaders handle this the way that I needed them to? No, they didn't. Well, then I have a voice. I mean, one of the best things about being in America, at least, like the America that I define is like that you can define America the way that you want it. Like, to me, that's what democracy is if something is unright with me, I need to like go out and vote to make change and make this the America I want it to be. And I think that a lot of people need to see that they have that in them, that they have that ability to go out and make change now. And I think that that's the thing that I think we all need to try to do. And everyone's going to do it differently. And I think some people are going to have like, I mean, I don't want to belittle the fact that like anybody suffering right now or anybody who's actually experienced death might hear this or see this and go, give me a break, lady. I lost my dad, or I lost my spouse, or I lost my child, and I'm not going to like reset my life because you think this is a great time. Like,
yes.
I mean, people really have suffered here, and I think that this is a moment for us all to really do what I've been saying and like take that reflection process of who was I before? What has this caused me to think about? What are the things that I think are most important in my life? How has this, because this has scared you and like scared people enough to cause you to be like, what's important in my life? Who are the most important people in my life? What is worth spending my time on? So it causes you to do that. And now you have this, so where do you want to go forward from now? Because having this amount of time to kind of think about yourself is crucial.
Yeah. And it's definitely been that for me, for sure.
That's good. I know for like in terms of personal reaction, like just seeing you do these videos from a coworker standpoint, it's like, I see you working at school and, we chat at school, but this is a whole other light for you that's like, holy cow, like you're passionate about like, and this came out of this. And it's kind of an incredible thing to see someone's like creativity come from, such a strange times.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I would describe it too. That's cool. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that you could do this. This has been awesome. I've learned so much. It's really rich.
It's a good interview. Thank you very much.
I'm glad. Awesome. All right. Thanks. Well, Elizabeth Hatch, we're going to sign off. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care.
You too.
Tempest